They say life can change in an instant. For Ethan Cross, it changed in exactly 12 seconds. What if the most terrifying moment of your life, the one where you face your greatest fear, also brings you face to face with an unexpected miracle? Before we dive into this heart-stopping tale of destiny and profound transformation, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments if you believe in miracles. One moment, Ethan Cross was sipping overpriced espresso on the terrace of his Manhattan penthouse, idly scrolling through a finance report he'd already read twice. The next, his world tilted, spun, shattered into a million pieces. His 5-year-old son, Alex, was choking. The nanny screamed. Ethan froze for the first 2 seconds, his heart slamming into a frantic panic. The sound of his porcelain cup shattering on the marble floor was somehow quieter than his own ragged breath. The boy's face was turning blue. Alex's wide eyes, filled with terror, clawed at his throat. No sound, no air. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday morning. Now he was watching his son die. Then, suddenly, a woman he didn't recognize was on her knees beside Alex. She'd been in the building lobby, he would later learn. A pediatric nurse named Dr. Olivia Hayes, visiting her mother on the floor below. She heard the frantic screams from the hallway, burst into the apartment without asking, and dropped to her knees with terrifying, clinical calm. 911 is on the way, someone stammered, frantically dialing. But Olivia didn't wait. She positioned herself behind Alex and began the Heimlich maneuver. Quick, sharp, focused. 1, 2, 3 thrusts, then a violent gag. A small, colorful piece of candy hit the polished floor. Alex gasped, cried, breathed. The air rushed back into Ethan's own lungs. 2. A gasping, ragged relief. The room erupted. Relief, sobs, applause. But Ethan didn't move. He just stared at the woman on the floor, who gently cradled his son's head and whispered, "You're okay, buddy. You're safe. You're okay." In that moment, she wasn't just a stranger. She was a miracle. Olivia didn't wait for thanks. When the paramedics arrived and Alex was declared stable, she calmly gave her name and credentials, scribbled a few concise notes for the ER team, and stood to leave. Ethan, finally shaking off his shock, stepped in her way. "Wait." She turned, her expression tired, but polite. "Yes, Mr. Cross? How do you know who I am?" he asked, startled. She gave a soft, knowing smile. "You own the building. You're constantly on the news. You donated $1 million to Sloan Pediatrics last year." He blinked, surprised by her detailed knowledge. She added, "Good cause. Poor follow-through." His brows rose in a sharp arch. "You didn't visit the wing. You didn't meet the kids. You just signed the check and left." His jaw tensed. "And how do you know that?" "I work there." Olivia turned to go, a quiet resolve in her posture. He stepped forward again, blocking her path. "Let me thank you properly." "You already did." "No," he insisted, his voice raw with a sincerity that surprised even himself. "I mean it. Dinner. Anything." She paused, then truly looked at him. Ethan Cross, CEO of Cross Global, Forbes cover darling, widowed, emotionally unavailable billionaire with a sharp jaw and an even sharper tongue. "I'm not a story you can turn into a headline," she said, her voice even. "I'm not asking for a story," he replied, his gaze unwavering. Their eyes held for a beat too long, a silent acknowledgement of something more, something undefined. Then she left, leaving him alone in the quiet apartment, the echo of her words lingering in the air. What do you think of Olivia's blunt honesty? And what is the true meaning behind Ethan's sudden desire to properly thank her? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this intriguing encounter has captivated you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next part of this extraordinary story. The next day, Ethan found her. He'd had his team track down where she worked, Eastbrook Medical, Pediatric Trauma Unit. He showed up with a sprawling bouquet that cost more than a month's rent in most parts of the city and stood awkwardly in the sterile hallway, waiting for her shift to end. She looked at the flowers, then at him, a dry amusement in her eyes. That's a ridiculous number of roses. They said it was romantic, Ethan admitted, a faint blush rising to his neck. We're not dating. Yet, Ethan countered, a rare, playful glint in his gaze. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips, but she didn't walk away. Started slow. Lunch in the bustling hospital cafeteria. Coffee before her shifts. Shared in the quiet dawn of the city. Text messages exchanged between high-stakes meetings and late-night hospital rounds, not overtly flirty yet, but filled with a growing, undeniable meaning. She challenged him, relentlessly calling him out when he dodged emotion, when he retreated behind his corporate facade. And somehow she made him laugh genuinely, openly, in a way no one else could. Alex, his 5-year-old son, adored her. He asked for her by name, drew countless pictures of her with imaginary sparkles in her hair, always beaming. She wasn't impressed by his money. She didn't care about his vast reputation. And maybe, just maybe, that's precisely why Ethan found himself utterly unable to stay away. What profound impact do you think Olivia's presence is having on Ethan and Alex? And what does it truly mean to find happiness after profound loss? Share your insights in the comments below. If this story of an unexpected connection is touching your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next part of their extraordinary journey. One night, after Alex was finally asleep, Olivia came over. Not for dinner, not for a date, just to talk. Ethan poured them both wine, the amber liquid swirling in their glasses. They sat on the balcony of his penthouse, the city breathing around them, its million lights a distant, glittering carpet. Why do you always act like you're fine when you're clearly not? She asked, her voice soft but direct, cutting through the silence. He looked at her, truly seeing her. My wife, Sarah, died 5 years ago, he said, the words heavy with unspoken grief. And I still don't know how to grieve without feeling like I'm betraying her memory. Olivia's expression softened, a shared understanding in her eyes. I know what it's like to lose someone too soon. Who did you lose? He asked, surprised. She hesitated, her gaze distant for a moment. My brother, Michael. Cancer. He was 9. A profound silence settled between them, a quiet testament to shared loss. Is that why you became a pediatric nurse? He asked, the connection dawning on him. It's why I learned to breathe again. Later that night, as she stood to leave, a fragile hope in his voice, he asked, Stay. She turned, her eyes questioning. Why? Because for the first time in a long time, Ethan confessed, his voice raw with vulnerability. I don't feel like I'm just surviving. I feel alive. Olivia didn't answer with words. She simply walked to him, stepped into his space, and kissed him. Slow, real, and utterly honest. Peace never lasts long in stories like this. 2 days after their first kiss, Olivia received a call from the hospital board. An anonymous complaint. The voice on the other end said, regarding improper boundaries with a patient's family. Ethan was livid. He immediately offered his top lawyers unlimited money, all his considerable influence. But Olivia declined it all. I can fight my own battles, Ethan, she said, her voice firm, resolute. But it's my fault, he argued, the words raw with frustration. No, she replied, her gaze unwavering. It's my choice. Her eyes held his, a silent challenge. But if I lose this job, Ethan, we're done. Why? He asked, bewildered. Because I won't let myself become dependent on you. That night, he lay awake, staring at the polished ceiling of his penthouse, wondering how love could feel so right and so impossible at the same time. Ethan Cross had fought wars on Wall Street. He'd faced down ruthless CEOs, defiant senators, and scandal-hungry journalists. But nothing felt as personal, or as utterly helpless, as watching Olivia walk into a closed-door disciplinary hearing with her career on the line, knowing there wasn't a single dollar he could spend to fix it without making everything worse. He waited outside the boardroom for over an hour, pacing the hushed hallway, the silence pressing in on him. When she finally emerged, her face was unreadable, a mask of quiet resolve. Well? He asked, his stomach tightening with dread. They're suspending me, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Without pay, pending further review. On what grounds? His own voice was sharp, laced with fury. Violation of professional boundaries with the parent of a minor patient. That's absurd. You saved my son. I broke the rules, Ethan. You saved my son. I still crossed a line. She didn't cry, didn't raise her voice. She just stood there in the silent hallway, hands tucked into the pockets of her scrubs, like someone who knew exactly what it cost to be right and still lose everything. I'll fix this, he said, stepping closer, reaching for her. No, she replied, her voice softer now, but with an iron will beneath it. You'll respect that this is mine to fight. Ethan, she emphasized, her eyes holding his. I mean it. If you push this, I walk away. It was the first time Ethan truly felt the sharp, undeniable edges of her. Not just her kindness, not her strength, but her fierce boundaries. She would not be saved. Not by him, not by anyone. He watched her walk away, the echo of her footsteps louder than any boardroom silence he'd ever endured. What do you think is the true meaning behind Olivia's unwavering boundaries? And why does Ethan struggle so much with not being able to fix things with his power? Share your insights in the comments below. If this story of an independent spirit challenging powerful expectations is captivating you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next part of their dramatic journey. Alex asked about Olivia that night. Is Dr. Olivia mad at us? No, buddy. Ethan lied, the word catching in his throat. Is she coming back? Alex's hopeful eyes pierced him. Ethan didn't have an answer, so he lied. She will. 3 weeks passed. No contact. Olivia had vanished into the quiet. Ethan buried himself in work, relentlessly trying to forget the curve of her smile, the fresh scent of her shampoo, the way she bit her lip when she was thinking through something complicated. But she was everywhere. In Alex's drawings, where his son invariably added sparkles to the hair of the super nurse. In the soft hum of silence that now filled the penthouse after bedtime. In the quiet, deliberate way he'd stopped drinking alone. Then one evening, he found an unassuming envelope tucked under his door. No postage stamps. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed, I've taken a position in San Diego. It's a children's palliative care unit. The offer came before all this. I accepted because it felt like the only place I could still do what I love. I didn't say goodbye because I didn't trust myself to mean it. Take care of Alex. And thank you for making me believe I could still feel something. Oh, Ethan sat down hard, his heart hollowed out by her words. She was gone. Just like that. He booked a flight the next morning. Not to chase her, not in anger or pursuit, but simply to think, to breathe, to understand. He took Alex with him. They went to the secluded cabin in Vermont, a place he hadn't visited since before his wife, Sarah, died. There, surrounded by dense woods, wrapped in a profound quiet broken only by the whisper of pine needles, he began to unravel. Alex, in his innocent way, asked questions. About his mom, Sarah. About Dr. Olivia. About what it meant to leave. Ethan answered him honestly as a father can when his own heart is breaking. On the fourth night, after Alex had finally fallen asleep, Ethan sat outside on the porch swing, staring at the constellations he'd never bothered to notice before. And then, finally, he cried. Not the angry, controlled kind of tears. Not the silent, stoic kind. The real kind. The kind that cleans out wounds you've pretended didn't exist for years. He cried for Sarah, the love he'd lost too soon. For Olivia, the hope he'd pushed away. And for the boy inside him who had never learned how to say, I need you, until it was far, far too late. What do you think is the true meaning of grief, and how does it reshape us? And do you believe Ethan's raw honesty with Alex is a step towards his own healing? Share your insights in the comments below. If this story of profound loss and the first steps towards healing resonates with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next part of their journey.
Mình sẽ tiếp tục với phần 5 ngay bây giờ nhé.
Okay. Show thinking. Here's part 5 of your story. Part 5. A drawing, a hopeful return. Back in the city, Olivia settled into her new life. The San Diego Palliative Care Unit was smaller, quieter, less chaotic than the trauma unit. More heartbreak, certainly, but it felt honest, raw, and true. She missed Alex most of all. She dreamed of him sometimes. His little arms around her neck, the way he used to call her, Super Olivia. She missed Ethan too. Not the billionaire. Not the headlines. Just the man who brought her coffee at sunrise and looked at her like she was the first honest thing he'd seen in a decade. Then one afternoon, walking past a small bookstore near the hospital, she stopped dead. Taped to the front window was a child's drawing. It was Alex's. She knew the art style instantly. The crooked trees, the whimsical rocket ship, the bright, uninhibited colors. And beneath it, in shaky block letters, "For Olivia, come home." Her chest cracked open. A wave of emotion so powerful it stole her breath. She stepped inside, heart racing, scanning every face. He wasn't there. Not Alex. Not Ethan. But behind the counter, the clerk smiled knowingly. "You're Olivia?" She nodded, barely holding herself together. The clerk handed her an envelope. Inside, a single handwritten letter. "You told me not to chase you," it began, in Ethan's familiar, elegant script. "So I didn't. But I needed you to know. Alex hasn't stopped asking for you. And I haven't stopped hoping you'd forgive me for being someone you had to walk away from. We're in Vermont for the next 2 weeks. The cabin address is on the back of this letter. There's no pressure. Just an open door. Love, E." She stood in the bookstore for a long, timeless moment, the letter clutched in her hand, her pulse shaking, her heart, dormant for so long, slowly, painfully, waking up. What do you think is the true meaning of an open door when so much has been lost? And how will Olivia overcome her fear to step through it? Share your insights in the comments below. If this story of second chances and profound emotional awakening is gripping you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next heartwarming chapter. Olivia didn't decide right away. She held the letter for a full day, tucking it into the pocket of her coat, unfolding it a dozen times, rereading it every time the fear in her chest got too loud. She told herself it wasn't a good idea, that going to Vermont would only reopen something that was already bleeding. But there was a drawing taped to the front window of a bookstore 3,000 miles from Manhattan, made by a 5-year-old boy who still called her his favorite person. And that mattered. It mattered more than pride, more than fear, more than the pieces of her heart she had tried to patch together on her own. She packed a small bag, told her new supervisor she needed a few days, booked a last-minute flight to Burlington, rented a car, and drove through a fog-draped countryside with the windows cracked and the heater on full blast. Vermont was colder than she remembered. Or maybe she just felt smaller inside the vast, hushed silence. The cabin was tucked into the very edge of a dense pine forest, perched above a quiet, mirror-smooth lake. When she stepped onto the porch, suitcase in hand, she didn't know what to expect. Ethan opened the door before she could even knock. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Then Alex's voice, a joyful shout, broke the tension. "Olivia!" He barreled into her legs, nearly knocking her over. She dropped to her knees, hugging him so tightly he squealed with delight. "I missed you," he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I missed you too, buddy," she responded, tears welling in her eyes. Ethan watched from the doorway, one hand on the frame, like he needed to ground himself against the surreal reality of her return. "You came," he said softly, his voice filled with a raw, unadulterated hope. Olivia stood, nodding once. "You said there'd be an open door. There always will be." The first night, they said little. Alex proudly showed her his new drawings. Olivia helped him with a complicated puzzle, their heads bent close. Ethan cooked badly, but she ate every bite, grateful for the simple domesticity. He lit a fire in the hearth, and they sat there quietly, the kind of silence that feels earned. a comfort born from shared vulnerability. Later, after Alex went to bed, Olivia stepped onto the porch, drawn by the quiet beauty of the moonlit forest. Ethan followed, his presence a warm, reassuring shadow. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know. Why did you?" She looked out at the towering trees, her gaze distant. "Because I couldn't stop hearing your son's laugh in my dreams. And because your letter didn't ask for forgiveness. It just offered a door." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "And do I get forgiveness?" "Not all at once," she responded softly, turning to face him. "But I wouldn't be here if I didn't want to try." They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Ethan told her about Sarah's favorite song, a melancholic Chopin piece she used to play. Olivia told him how she still kept Michael's worn baseball glove in her closet. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. Just sitting beside each other felt like enough. The next morning, Olivia woke to the intoxicating smell of pancakes and the sound of laughter. She followed the joyful noise to the kitchen. Alex was on a stool, perched precariously, attempting to flip pancakes with Ethan's help. Batter was everywhere, on the counter, on their clothes, even on Alex's cheek. "Daddy said he's trying to be domestic," Alex announced proudly. Ethan smirked, a smudge of flour on his nose. "Failing spectacularly." Olivia smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "You're not failing." She didn't mean the pancakes. He knew that. They stayed 4 days, allowing the cabin's quiet solitude to wrap around them, healing unseen wounds. On the third night, as the fire in the hearth burned low, Ethan handed her a wrapped package. "I wanted to give you something," he said, his voice soft. "But it's not jewelry, or flowers, or anything that costs more than $15. Inside, nestled simply, was a leather-bound journal. The first page read, "Things I never said, but should have." It was filled with short, raw entries, moments, feelings, profound regrets, and fragile hopes. The last page was blank, save for one line at the top. "If you're reading this, I love you." Olivia traced the words with her fingers, her breath catching. "I'm scared," she whispered, the honesty a painful admission. "So am I," he replied, his gaze steady, mirroring her vulnerability. "But I've lived enough years building empires. I want to spend the rest building something real." She looked at him, truly seeing the earnest desire in his eyes, the man beneath the polished facade. And this time she didn't hold back. She leaned in and kissed him, slowly, deeply, like she had been waiting her whole life to be met halfway. What profound shift has occurred in Ethan's priorities? And how does Olivia's courage inspire him to build something truly meaningful? Share your insights in the comments below. If this story of an unexpected love blooming from the ashes of grief is touching your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next heartwarming chapter. That night, after Alex was asleep, nestled safely in his new bed in the cabin, Ethan pulled a small velvet box from the drawer by the bedside. Olivia's breath hitched, her heart leaping. "No," he said quickly, guessing her thought, a gentle smile on his lips. "Not that." He opened the box. Inside, gleaming softly, was a single silver key. "To the cabin?" she asked, bewildered. "To the next chapter," he clarified, his voice filled with a quiet promise. "Wherever we write it." She took it, closing her hand around the small metallic shape, feeling the immense weight of its symbolism. "I'm ready," she whispered. They didn't rush back to Manhattan. They let the forest hold them a little longer. Let the quiet stretch until it transformed into a profound, healing peace. They read stories by the crackling fire, cooked badly and laughed loudly, their joy echoing through the wooden beams. They fell in love, not like a sudden violent crash, but like a sunrise, slow, certain, undeniable, warming them from the inside out. They returned to Manhattan in early spring, the city shedding its winter skin beneath a veil of early blooms and golden light. Olivia moved into Ethan's penthouse, not because he asked, but because one evening she brought over a small bag and simply never took it back. Her scrubs began appearing in his laundry, Her favorite mug claimed a spot beside his on the kitchen shelf, and Alex, his 5-year-old son, began referring to her room as Mom's room, without hesitation or instruction. The word terrified Olivia. That weight, that profound expectation. But it warmed her too because he meant it genuinely, naturally. And Ethan never corrected him. He just smiled. A quiet, reverent expression. Like he couldn't believe this precious second chance had miraculously landed in his lap. Olivia started working again, part-time, at a non-profit children's clinic downtown. It wasn't the high-stakes pediatric trauma unit she'd left behind, but it felt good, felt clean, felt impactful. And, most importantly, it was entirely hers. She made her own rules this time, drew her own lines. Her identity no longer hung on a hospital badge or defined by sacrifice. She was meticulously building a life. One with boundaries. One with balance. Then came the gala. A prestigious benefit for pediatric mental health, hosted at one of Ethan's sleek downtown properties. He insisted Olivia attend, not merely as his date, but as the evening's keynote speaker. They asked for someone who's lived it on both sides, he said, his eyes earnest. And you're the only person I trust with that kind of truth. Olivia hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her thing. Spotlights weren't her thing. Standing in front of a ballroom full of powerful billionaires, cunning politicians, and perfectly polished, impossibly elegant women? Definitely not her thing. But she said yes anyway, because growth, she knew, often comes wrapped in discomfort. That night, she wore a navy satin gown, and a borrowed courage that shimmered like the fabric. Ethan watched her from across the vast, glittering room like he was seeing something truly sacred, his gaze unwavering, filled with profound reverence. What do you think is the true power of sharing one's authentic story, especially after profound struggle? And how will Olivia's vulnerability resonate with such a powerful audience? Share your insights in the comments below. If this story of courage and stepping into one's truth is inspiring you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next pivotal chapter. Olivia stepped onto the stage, her navy satin gown shimmering under the bright lights. Her voice trembled for only the first 5 seconds, a fragile human tremor. Then, she anchored herself, finding strength in the unwavering gazes of Ethan and Alex in the front row. I'm not here to tell you about statistics, she began, her voice steady and clear. You can read those in the program. I'm here to talk about the moments between the emergencies, the quiet heartbreaks, the impossible choices, the children who survive, the ones who don't, and the people who carry them anyway. A profound silence fell over the room, held like a collective breath. I've been in trauma rooms. I've held hands during chemo. I've walked out of hospital rooms knowing the next time I walked in, there wouldn't be a child in the bed anymore. Olivia looked directly at the powerful, polished faces in the crowd. But I've also seen miracles. I've seen healing. And I've seen what love can do when it walks in during the worst moment and stays. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, a silent, powerful acknowledgement passing between them. Healing doesn't always come in hospitals. Sometimes it comes in people. The room erupted when she finished. A wave of applause and emotional release. Ethan was the first to stand, his face radiant with pride. And afterward, when she stepped off stage, shaking and breathless from the raw emotion she had just poured out, he pulled her close and whispered, I've never been more proud of anyone in my life. But the next morning, everything changed. A news outlet ran a venomous headline, Billionaire's girlfriend accused of unprofessional conduct in pediatric unit. Someone had anonymously leaked the original complaint. The suspension, the board hearing, details were twisted, facts distorted. Anonymous quotes from hospital insiders claimed favoritism, manipulation, and blurred ethical lines. It was ugly, and it spread like wildfire. Ethan's PR team moved immediately, issuing furious denials, statements, and legal threats. But the damage was done. Olivia's nonprofit clinic received dozens of angry messages. Parents pulling their kids from programs, donors threatening to withdraw support. She was publicly called a fraud, a gold digger, just another headline. What do you think is the most painful accusation Olivia faced, and why? And how will she fight back against such public slander? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience against injustice is gripping you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next powerful revelation. Ethan wanted to burn everything down. His rage was monumental, but Olivia wouldn't let him. "I fought to be someone I could be proud of," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I won't lose that now just because people are louder than the truth." "I can protect you," Ethan insisted, his fists clenched. "I'm not asking for protection," she replied, meeting his gaze. "I'm asking you to believe me." He did. Of course he did. But this wasn't about belief. It was about power. And Olivia was done letting hers be taken. She held a press conference. Alone. She stood before the cameras in a simple gray blazer. No makeup, no handlers, just her. "I'm not perfect," she said, her voice unwavering. "But I'm honest. I've spent my life walking into rooms people run from. I've lost patience. I've made mistakes. But I've never, not once, exploited a child for personal gain. And I certainly didn't fall in love with a man because of his bank account." She paused, her eyes scanning the faces of the journalists, holding their gaze. "I fell in love with him because he made me feel like I was more than what I'd survived." The room was silent, utterly hushed. Then someone asked, "Do you regret the relationship?" Olivia looked straight into the camera, her integrity shining through. "No," she said, "because he and his son reminded me that love can be real, even after the worst happens. And I'll never apologize for that." By nightfall, the tide had turned. The vicious story shifted. A deluge of support flooded in. Letters, donations, heartfelt apologies. The clinic swiftly reinstated her full-time. The hospital board issued a public apology. The people who mattered knew the truth. That night, as the city lights twinkled beneath them, Ethan took Olivia's hand, drawing her onto the rooftop of their building. "You didn't just save Alex," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You saved me too." He dropped to one knee, a simple, heartfelt gesture. No velvet box, no meticulously prepared speech. Just a small gold ring, held between two fingers, shining softly in the dim light. "Marry me, Olivia Hayes." Olivia's breath caught, a choked laugh escaping her lips, tears streaming down her face. "Say that again," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just once, so I know it's real." "Marry me," he repeated, his voice unwavering, filled with absolute certainty. She nodded, a single joyful tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Yeah, I will. Yes." Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into the deepest, most heartfelt kiss of his life. And in that moment, as his lips met hers, Nicholas Carter knew. He had finally found something worth more than all the money in the world. Their wedding 1 year later was a dream, not because of a grand venue or extravagant details, but because it was real. When Olivia walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on his, Ethan knew he had never been more certain of anything in his life. But beyond the wedding, what mattered most was what they built together. With Olivia's fierce passion and Ethan's immense resources, they launched the Hayes Cross Initiative, a program dedicated to helping young women build their careers in business, providing them with the mentorship and opportunities that Olivia had once fought so hard to earn on her own. Their days were filled with profound purpose. Their nights were filled with laughter, quiet conversations, and a love that grew deeper with every shared breath. And every morning, when Ethan woke up next to the woman who had utterly changed his life, he knew. He had finally found something money could never buy: happiness, unwavering love, and a future worth everything. They spent their honeymoon in Italy. Alex came too, of course. It wasn't a conventional start to a marriage, but then, neither of them had lived conventional lives. They walked along cobbled streets in Florence, shared gooey gelato in Venice, and danced barefoot under the stars in the gardens of a small villa overlooking the coast. Olivia laughed more in those 2 weeks than she had in the last decade, her joy a symphony Ethan silently memorized. And at night, With Alex asleep in the next room, they whispered promises to each other beneath soft sheets and open windows. Not perfect, but real. Always real. This is the final part of your story. Then came the call. Late one afternoon, back in Manhattan, as the city groaned beneath the oppressive summer heat, Olivia stepped into her clinic for a regular shift and was met by her director. "There's something you should see," the woman said, handing her an unmarked envelope. Inside, a printed article draft. Unpublished. The title screamed, "The Nurse, the Billionaire, and the Other Son." Olivia's heart stopped. The article claimed Ethan had a second child. A son born of an affair during his marriage to Sarah, now living abroad. The piece insinuated Olivia had agreed to marry him only after discovering this information, as part of a quiet arrangement to keep the story from going public. It was a lie, a cruel, precise one, but it felt deeply personal, because someone had gone digging. Too deep, too close. That night, Olivia asked him, "Ethan, is there something I don't know?" He stared at her, stunned. "No," he said slowly. "There's no other child. No hidden life. I swear to you." Her voice was quiet. "Then why does this feel so specific?" He sat down, then exhaled something heavy. A truth held captive for years. "There was someone. Before you. After Sarah died. It wasn't serious. But she told me she was pregnant a few weeks before she disappeared. I hired a private investigator. She'd left the country. I never confirmed anything." He looked up, his eyes raw. Then came the call. Late one afternoon, back in Manhattan, as the city groaned beneath the oppressive summer heat, Olivia stepped into her clinic for a regular shift and was met by her director. "There's something you should see," the woman said, handing her an unmarked envelope. Inside, a printed article draft. Unpublished. The title screamed, "The Nurse, the Billionaire, and the Other Son." Olivia's heart stopped. The article claimed Ethan had a second child. A son born of an affair during his marriage to Sarah, now living abroad. The piece insinuated Olivia had agreed to marry him only after discovering this information, as part of a quiet arrangement to keep the story from going public. It was a lie, a cruel, precise one, but it felt deeply personal, because someone had gone digging. Too deep, too close. That night, Olivia asked him, "Ethan, is there something I don't know?" He stared at her, stunned. "No," he said slowly. "There's no other child. No hidden life. I swear to you." Her voice was quiet. "Then why does this feel so specific?" He sat down, then exhaled something heavy. A truth held captive for years. "There was someone. Before you. After Sarah died. It wasn't serious. But she told me she was pregnant a few weeks before she disappeared. I hired a private investigator. She'd left the country. I never confirmed anything." He looked up, his eyes raw. "I haven't told anyone, not even my lawyers, because I didn't want to chase ghosts." Olivia stood still. "Ethan, if there's even a chance." "I know." Silence filled the room. Then she asked, quietly, "What would you do if it were true?" He didn't hesitate. "I'd find him. I'd bring him home." The story leaked within days. Not the full, drafted article, but a headline, a whisper, a grainy photograph of Ethan exiting a building he hadn't entered in years. The media ran with it. Cross scandal buried by marriage? Olivia kept her head down. She went to work. She loved Alex. But she felt the shift. On the street, in the grocery store, even at the clinic, where some parents looked at her like they weren't sure whether to admire or judge her. Ethan stayed silent publicly, fiercely protecting Olivia. Privately, he searched. Within a week, he had a name, Leo, 6 years old, living in Marseille, France, with a woman who'd changed her name and refused contact with anyone from her past. And a DNA test confirmed it. He was Ethan's son. Olivia read the report in silence, then looked at Ethan. "So what now?" "I go get him." She nodded. "I'm coming with you." Marseille was warm and quiet. The streets buzzed with summer markets and music. But Olivia could see the tension in Ethan's shoulders as they stood outside the small yellow house on the hillside. The door opened slowly. The woman who stood there was thinner than the photo, tired in the eyes, guarded. And behind her, a boy. Dark curls, big serious eyes. He looked like Alex. Ethan stepped forward. I'm not here to fight you. I just want to meet him. The woman studied him, then, after a long moment, stepped aside. And for the first time, Ethan knelt before the boy and said, Hi, Leo. I think I might be your dad. Leo said nothing, but he didn't run. And that was enough for a start. They stayed in France for 2 weeks. Olivia watched Ethan slowly build trust with a boy who'd only known shadows of him. They played cards, kicked a soccer ball, talked about space and animals and American breakfasts. Leo didn't call him Dad. Not yet. But when they said goodbye at the airport, the boy ran after Ethan and hugged him tight. Will I see you again? He asked. Ethan knelt. I promise. Back in Manhattan, Olivia tucked Alex into bed. He looked up at her with sleepy eyes. Do I still get to keep you forever? He asked, his voice small. Olivia kissed his forehead. Always. But that night, as she lay beside Ethan, he whispered something into the dark. Do you ever think this is too much for you? Olivia turned to face him, her heart overflowing. No, she said. I think life finally stopped taking and started giving. He reached for her hand beneath the covers. And I think we're just getting started. 6 months later, the Manhattan townhouse felt different. Louder, warmer, lived in. Leo was moving in. It had taken time, months of paperwork, therapy, meetings with lawyers and mediators. But Ethan had been patient, gentle, present, and Leo had responded. He still didn't call Ethan Dad, but he called him when he had a nightmare. And that meant more. Olivia, meanwhile, had become the quiet, steady center of the house. She didn't push. She listened. She gave Leo space, and he, in turn, gave her his cautious trust. Alex adjusted fast, faster than anyone expected. He told everyone he had a bonus brother, and he liked that Leo was good at Legos but bad at Mario Kart. The boys were different, one loud and imaginative, the other cautious, careful. But somehow, beautifully, they worked, just like the two people raising them. Olivia stepped into her clinic role full-time again. But this time, it wasn't about proving anything. She focused on community programs, bringing vital care to children without access. She started a scholarship in Michael's name, her late brother's. Ethan matched every donation, but only after asking her permission. She'd earned that kind of respect. He knew better now. In late fall, as the leaves fell and the holidays approached, Ethan planned something quiet. No press. No spectacle. Just family. He brought Olivia back to the Vermont cabin one weekend. Just the two of them. They hiked, talked, held each other. And on the final night, beneath the canopy of 1,000,000 stars, he surprised her with a second ring. Simple, elegant, engraved inside with the words, Not because I lost, but because I found. Olivia didn't cry this time. She just smiled, kissed him slowly, and whispered, Forever. They didn't need a second wedding. They had a second life. And that was enough. Months later, Olivia found out she was pregnant. She sat with the test in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Stunned. Not scared. Just overwhelmed by the sheer joy. Ethan walked in, saw her face, and immediately dropped to his knees. Are you okay? He asked. She nodded, silent, then handed him the test. His eyes widened, then filled with tears. He held her for a long, quiet moment, whispering, You're incredible, over and over until she believed it too. They told the boys together. Alex screamed with joy, throwing his arms around them both. Leo didn't say anything at first, just went quiet. Later that night, Olivia found him sitting alone on the stairs. You okay? He looked up. I don't know how to be a big brother. She sat beside him. Neither did Alex. Neither did I when I had my brother. You don't have to be perfect, Leo. You just have to be you. That's enough. He leaned into her shoulder. Do I still get to stay? Her throat tightened. She looked him in the eyes, her voice filled with unwavering love. You're not going anywhere. When their daughter was born, they named her Elena, after Olivia's mother. Leo held her first. Alex sang to her, off-key but full of love. Ethan cried harder than anyone, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. And Olivia, she just watched the life she never imagined unfold around her, piece by piece, like the final perfect snap of a complex puzzle. One evening, years later, Olivia stood in the hallway outside the nursery. Elena had just fallen asleep in Ethan's arms. Leo was in the living room, reading aloud to Alex. And the whole house was lit with the kind of soft, golden light that only exists when love has earned its way in, when a family is truly, deeply home. Ethan came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her gently back against his chest. "You okay?" he asked. She leaned back into him, completely at peace. "I'm better than okay. I'm alive." He smiled, kissing the top of her head. "I never said thank you." "For what?" she whispered. "For saving Alex. For saving me." She turned in his arms, her eyes meeting his. "I didn't save you, Ethan. You let yourself be saved." Outside, snow began to fall. Soft, quiet, real. And inside, their life went on. Messy, beautiful, unscripted, true. Built not from perfect beginnings, but from second chances. Ethan Cross once thought that success was everything. That power, wealth, and control were all that mattered. But then came Olivia Hayes, the woman who proved him wrong. She wasn't just another employee. She wasn't just a passing distraction. She was his greatest challenge, his greatest lesson, his greatest love. And in the end, it wasn't power or money that changed his life. It was her. Now they stand together, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in life, in love, and in purpose. Because love isn't just about finding someone, it's about choosing them every single day. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss another heartwarming, emotional tale. Because sometimes, the most unexpected stories lead to the most unforgettable love. Love has the power to change everything, if we're brave enough to let it.
The rain pounded relentlessly against the windshield, a cacophony of drops muffled only slightly by the plush interior of Diego Carter's sleek black sedan. The rhythmic whoosh of the wipers mirrored the cadence of his thoughts, frustrated, restless, and swirling in every direction. Outside, the streets of Seattle lay deserted under the storm's assault, their usual bustle washed away by the downpour. Diego gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles whitening as he navigated the drenched roads, the faint hum of classical music from the car speakers doing little to soothe his agitation. He had just left another one of those galas. Lavish, indulgent affairs where laughter was hollow, handshakes were calculated, and conversations rarely ventured beyond investments and IPOs. Normally, Diego could endure these with ease, even relish the power plays they offered, but tonight it had felt stifling. Every deal, every carefully veiled compliment seemed to mock the purpose he had once believed in. As he stopped at a red light, his gaze drifted. Beneath the weak glow of a flickering street lamp, a figure huddled against the cold. The person, a woman young by the looks of her, was barely distinguishable from the shadows. She clutched a battered backpack to her chest, her thin frame trembling against the chill. Wet hair clung to her face, and her clothes were little more than soaked layers offering no protection against the storm. Diego's jaw tightened, a familiar pang tugging at his chest. He wasn't naive. Seattle had its share of homelessness, and he'd seen it plenty of times before. It was easy to ignore, even easier to rationalize away. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the look on her face, distant yet defiant, or the way she seemed so small against the vastness of the city. The light turned green. The car behind him honked impatiently, jolting him from his thoughts. Diego pressed the gas, tearing his gaze from the girl as his car surged forward. "Not my problem," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head as if to rid himself of the image. He turned up the music, trying to drown out the unwelcome thoughts. Yet, even as the rain blurred the world outside his windows, her face lingered. The hint of desperation in her eyes, the stark vulnerability etched into her posture. It was all too familiar. It echoed a version of himself he thought he'd left behind long ago. 2 blocks later, Diego slammed the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the slick pavement. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the internal battle raging inside him. A voice in his head, cool and rational, reminded him that he owed this stranger nothing. But a deeper instinct, one he couldn't quite suppress, urged him otherwise. "Damn it!" he hissed, throwing the car into reverse. Moments later, he was pulling up beside the girl. The icy rain cut through his tailored coat as he stepped out of the car, approaching her cautiously. "Hey!" he called, his voice harsher than intended. She flinched, her wide eyes snapping up to meet his, filled with suspicion and fear. Diego raised his hands, palms out, as if approaching a skittish animal. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quickly. "But you can't stay out here. You'll freeze." Her lips parted, but no words came. She simply shook her head, pulling the backpack closer to her chest. Diego took a step closer, softening his tone. "Look, I can give you a place to stay, just for tonight. Somewhere warm." She hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "Why would you care?" The question caught Diego off guard. For a moment, he didn't have an answer. Why did he care? He could have driven on, ignored the pull in his chest, and gone home. Yet here he was, standing in the rain, trying to help someone he didn't even know. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I see something familiar in you." Her gaze lingered on him, weighing the sincerity of his words. Finally she nodded, a small, reluctant movement. Diego shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, ignoring the cold that bit through his dress shirt. "Let's go," he said. guiding her toward the car. The drive was silent. She clutched the coat tightly, her body pressed into the corner of the passenger seat, as if trying to disappear. Diego didn't push her for conversation. Instead, he focused on the road, unsure of what he'd just set in motion, but certain he couldn't turn back now. The rain intensified as Diego leaned forward in his seat, his gaze locked on the figure under the awning. Bailey had shifted slightly, pulling her damp hoodie tighter around herself, her shoulders trembling in the cold. The sight tugged at something deep within Diego, a place he rarely allowed himself to revisit. He exhaled sharply, gripping the steering wheel tighter, trying to convince himself to leave. He could practically hear the voices of his colleagues, mocking his hesitation. You can't save everyone, Diego. It wasn't his responsibility. But as the light turned green and the car behind him blared its horn, he couldn't move forward. Diego clenched his jaw, put the car in reverse, and backed into a parking spot near the curb. The rain pelted his windshield like an urgent reminder of the girl he was about to approach. He grabbed his umbrella, hesitating before stepping out into the storm. The icy rain immediately seeped through his tailored coat as he crossed the sidewalk toward Bailey. "Hey!" he called out, keeping his voice steady but firm enough to be heard over the downpour. Bailey jerked her head up, startled. Her eyes, wide and distrustful, met his. She looked as though she was prepared to bolt at any second. "I'm not here to hurt you," Diego said quickly, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "You can't stay out here in this. You'll freeze." Bailey's lips parted as if to speak, but she stayed silent, her wary expression betraying her internal conflict. Diego glanced around, noting the boarded-up windows of the shop behind her and the growing puddle at her feet. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked, his voice softening. She shook her head, hugging her knees closer to her chest. "I'm fine," she murmured, though her shivering betrayed her words. "No, you're not," Diego replied firmly, surprising even himself with the intensity of his concern. "Look, I'm not asking you to trust me, but I can't just leave you here. My place is nearby. You can stay the night, get warm, dry off, and leave whenever you want tomorrow." Bailey studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Why would you care?" she finally asked, her voice edged with skepticism. Diego hesitated. It was a fair question, one he wasn't entirely sure how to answer. "Maybe because someone helped me when I needed it once," he said, his words more honest than he'd expected. "And maybe it's just the right thing to do." The rain hammered down as the silence between them stretched. Finally, Bailey nodded, her movements cautious and uncertain. Diego shrugged off his coat, draping it over her shoulders, and held out the umbrella as she stood. "Come on," he said, leading her to the car. Inside, the warmth of the heater enveloped them, though the air was thick with tension. Diego focused on the road, resisting the urge to glance at Bailey as she sat stiffly beside him, clutching the coat like a shield. "What's your name?" he asked after a few minutes, breaking the silence. "Bailey," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Bailey, you're safe now," Diego said, his tone resolute. The words hung in the air as they approached his penthouse, setting the stage for an interaction that neither of them could have anticipated. Diego woke to the faint aroma of scrambled eggs and toast, a scent that was both unexpected and oddly comforting. The sound of rain had softened into a gentle patter against the windows, and the early light of dawn peeked through the curtains. For a moment he thought he'd imagined the events of the previous night. But when he swung his legs over the side of the bed and caught sight of a neatly folded blanket on the couch in the living room, reality settled in. Bailey had been here. He walked toward the kitchen, his footsteps soft against the hardwood floor. The sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. His once cluttered countertop was now spotless, the dishes stacked neatly in the drying rack. On the table, a plate of scrambled eggs and toast sat alongside a steaming mug of coffee. A folded note rested beside the plate, its edges slightly crumpled as if someone had held it tightly before setting it down. Diego picked up the note, his heart beating a little faster than he cared to admit. The handwriting was neat but shaky, each letter carefully formed. Diego, thank you for last night. No one's shown me kindness like that in a long time, and I'll never forget it. I didn't want to take advantage of your generosity, so I thought it was best to leave early. I cleaned up as a small way of saying thanks. You didn't have to stop for me, but you did, and that means more than I can put into words. I hope one day I can repay that kindness. Bailey. Diego stared at the note, his emotions swirling in a way he couldn't quite place. Relief that she'd left without incident, frustration that she was gone, and something else, something closer to regret. He set the note down, picked up the mug of coffee, and leaned against the counter, replaying the events of the previous night in his mind. The house was eerily quiet. Without Bailey's cautious presence, it felt even emptier than usual. Diego prided himself on his independence, on his ability to navigate life without relying on others. Yet the silence now felt more like a void. He sighed and finished his coffee, trying to shake the feeling. Bailey had made her choice, and he couldn't fault her for it. Still, he couldn't help but wonder where she'd gone, or if she was safe. Later that morning, as Diego reviewed emails in his home office, his housekeeper Laura Mitchell arrived. A sharp-witted woman in her 50s, Laura had been with Diego since he first moved into the penthouse. She bustled into the kitchen, her arms full of groceries, and immediately noticed the changes. "Diego, did you finally hire someone to clean up around here?" she called out, her tone laced with amusement. "Or did a miracle happen?" Diego appeared in the doorway, holding the now folded note. "No miracle," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. "Just someone passing through." Laura paused, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Someone passing through? That's new." Diego shrugged, unsure how to explain. "A girl. She needed help last night. I brought her here to stay warm. She left early this morning." Laura raised an eyebrow. "You, Mr. Lone Wolf, bringing someone home? Now that's a story I need to hear." Diego waved her off, though a faint smile tugged at his lips. "It's nothing. She's gone now." Laura's expression softened, her teasing tone giving way to something gentler. "Well, for what it's worth, you did a good thing. But you don't seem all that happy about it." Diego didn't reply. Instead, he looked out the window, the city skyline blurred by lingering raindrops. Somewhere out there, Bailey was on her own again, and despite his best efforts to convince himself otherwise, Diego couldn't quite let go of the image of her sitting on his couch, clutching his coat like it was the only thing tethering her to the world. Diego spent the better part of the morning trying to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to Bailey. Her note sat on the edge of his desk, folded neatly as if to remind him of the fleeting connection they'd shared. The pragmatic side of him, the side that had helped him build a thriving tech empire, told him it wasn't his problem. She'd made her choice. But another part, quieter but more persistent, whispered that he couldn't just let it end here. By mid-afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore. Diego grabbed his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Detective Grayson," the voice said. "Alan, it's Diego." There was a pause. Well, the great Diego Carter. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Diego ignored the jab. "I need your help." Alan sighed audibly. "This sounds serious. Is it business? Personal? Or somewhere in that grey area you like to operate in?" Diego hesitated. "Personal. I need to find someone." Another pause. All right, who? A woman, late 20s maybe. Her name's Bailey Brooks. She's homeless, or she was last night. Alan's tone sharpened. Homeless? Diego, what exactly are you getting yourself into? Nothing illegal, if that's what you're asking. She stayed here last night, but she left early this morning. I need to know she's okay. The detective didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was softer. All right, I'll see what I can do. But you know how this works. Finding someone who doesn't want to be found isn't easy. Diego nodded, even though Alan couldn't see him. I understand. Just let me know if you find anything. After ending the call, Diego sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He didn't know what he hoped to accomplish. Bailey had made it clear she didn't want to stay, and chasing after her might only push her further away. But there was a nagging feeling he couldn't shake, a sense that their paths had crossed for a reason. That evening, as the rain began to fall again, Diego stepped out onto his penthouse balcony. The city stretched out before him, its lights flickering like fireflies against the darkened sky. He leaned against the railing, the cold drizzle soaking his shirt. His thoughts drifted to Bailey, the way she'd clutched his coat, her quiet gratitude, and the shadows in her eyes that hinted at stories she hadn't told. He wondered where she was now, if she was warm, if she was safe. Behind him, Laura stepped out onto the balcony, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. She handed it to Diego without a word, then leaned on the railing beside him. You're still thinking about her, she said, her voice matter of fact. Diego didn't deny it. She's just different. Laura studied him for a moment before speaking. You've got a big heart, Diego. You don't show it often, but it's there. Just be careful, all right? Some people don't want to be saved. Diego nodded, though her words did little to quiet the restlessness inside him. As the rain fell steadily around them, he made a silent vow. If he had the chance to help Bailey again, he wouldn't hesitate. Somewhere in the city, she was out there, and Diego wasn't ready to let her story end just yet. Diego stepped out into the brisk Seattle air, the rain reduced to a light drizzle that misted the sidewalks. He had spent the better part of the morning debating whether to look for Bailey, rationalizing that she was a stranger and not his responsibility. Yet, no matter how many times he tried to focus on work, the memory of her hunched figure and trembling voice lingered. The first shelter he visited was a modest brick building tucked between a laundromat and a hardware store. The smell of damp clothes and industrial cleaner greeted him as he stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking against the worn linoleum floor. A woman at the front desk, her face lined with years of weariness but softened by kindness, greeted him. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking him over with a mix of curiosity and guardedness. Diego pulled Bailey's note from his pocket, holding it out as if it might explain his presence. "I'm looking for someone, a young woman named Bailey. She might have come by here recently." The woman studied him, her gaze lingering on his tailored coat and expensive watch. "We get a lot of people passing through. What's she look like?" Diego described Bailey as best he could, her slight frame, her cautious demeanor, the way her hair clung to her face in the rain. The woman shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry," she said, "but if she's out there, she'll probably show up at one of the soup kitchens around town. Maybe check St. Mark's on 5th Avenue. They see a lot of people during lunchtime." Diego thanked her and left, his frustration mounting. It felt as though the city was swallowing Bailey whole, her presence dissipating into the rain-soaked streets. At St. Mark's, the volunteers were friendly but equally unhelpful, their faces apologetic as they shook their heads. The same pattern repeated at 2 more shelters, each one a dead end that left Diego feeling increasingly restless. By mid-afternoon, he found himself parked outside a diner on the edge of town. The building was unremarkable, faded paint, flickering neon sign. But it had been mentioned by a volunteer who thought she'd seen a girl matching Bailey's description there the previous evening. Diego sat in his car for a moment, watching the small crowd of patrons filter in and out. His heart thudded in his chest, a mix of hope and trepidation. Finally, he stepped out of the car and pushed open the diner's door. The scent of coffee and fried food enveloped him as he scanned the room. A waitress in a faded apron greeted him, her warm smile faltering slightly as she noticed his formal attire. "Table for one?" she asked. "I'm actually looking for someone," Diego replied. "A young woman named Bailey. She might be working here." The waitress's expression shifted, her brows knitting together. "Bailey?" she repeated, her tone cautious. "Yeah, she's been washing dishes in the back. Why are you looking for her?" Diego hesitated, aware of how his presence must seem. "I just want to make sure she's okay. She stayed at my place last night, just for shelter, and left early this morning. I've been worried about her." The waitress regarded him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. Finally, she nodded toward the kitchen. "Wait here. I'll see if she's around." Diego nodded, his pulse quickening as he sat down in a booth by the window. Through the swinging door to the kitchen, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure with dark hair tied back in a messy ponytail. It was Bailey. She was here. Diego spent the rest of the day trying to refocus his attention on work, but his mind kept drifting back to Bailey. The questions lingered like shadows, unwelcome but persistent. Where had she gone? Would she be all right? He told himself it wasn't his problem. She'd made it clear she didn't want to rely on anyone, and he respected that. Yet, deep down, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that he had left something unfinished. By late afternoon, Diego had enough of pacing his office. He grabbed his keys and stepped out into the city, hoping a walk would clear his head. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under a patchy grey sky. His usual haunts, the coffee shop on 4th Avenue, the quiet park near his building, felt too predictable. He found himself wandering aimlessly through Seattle's less familiar neighborhoods, his thoughts racing with every step. He replayed their conversation in the car, the way Bailey's voice had wavered when she told him her name, the guarded look in her eyes when she asked why he cared. He hadn't had a good answer then, and he still didn't, but the image of her huddled in the rain wouldn't leave him. Diego's footsteps carried him to a small community center tucked between two aging apartment buildings. A group of people loitered near the entrance, bundled in mismatched layers. Their laughter and chatter provided a stark contrast to their circumstances. Diego hesitated, feeling like an outsider in his neatly pressed coat, but he approached a woman handing out sandwiches. "Excuse me," he said, clearing his throat. "Have you seen a girl? Early 20s, short brown hair, carrying a beat-up backpack." The woman looked at him curiously, her hands stilling mid-motion. "We see a lot of people like that," she replied cautiously. "Why are you looking for her?" "She stayed at my place last night," Diego said, realizing how strange it sounded as the words left his mouth. "She left this morning, and I just want to make sure she's okay." The woman's expression softened slightly. "We haven't seen anyone matching that description today, but you might want to check the shelter on 8th. They get a lot of young folks passing through." Diego thanked her and set off in the direction she'd pointed. The shelter was a small, nondescript building with a line of people stretching out the door. The air was heavy with dampness and the hum of quiet conversations. Inside, Diego spoke to a volunteer, explaining as much as he could without revealing too much. "I think I know who you're talking about," the volunteer said after a moment's thought. "She comes by now and then, but she never stays long. She's cautious." Diego's chest tightened. That sounded like Bailey. Do you know where I might find her? The volunteer shook his head. She usually keeps to herself. There's a diner on Pine Street where she's been seen a few times. You could try there. Diego thanked the man and left the shelter with a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't fully understand why he was going to such lengths, but something about Bailey's fleeting presence had stirred something in him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. By the time he reached the diner, the sky had darkened again, and the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. Diego peered through the window and saw a figure hunched over a counter, her familiar backpack slung over the back of the chair. Relief coursed through him as he stepped inside. Bailey didn't notice him at first, too focused on the coffee cup in her hands. Her hair was damp, strands clinging to her face, and her shoulders were tense. Diego took a deep breath and approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Bailey," he said softly. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then her brows furrowed. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low but edged with disbelief. "I was worried about you," Diego admitted. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." Bailey looked at him, her expression a mixture of suspicion and confusion. "Why?" she asked again, her tone sharper this time. "Why do you care?" Diego hesitated, then said the only thing that felt true. "Because I've been where you are, and someone cared enough to help me." Bailey stared at him for a long moment, her defenses visibly wavering. Finally she sighed, her gaze dropping to the table. "I'm fine," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her words. "Maybe," Diego replied, pulling out the chair across from her. "But just hear me out." Bailey hesitated but nodded, the smallest crack appearing in her walls. Diego settled in, knowing this conversation could change everything. The soft hum of the diner filled the silence as they began to talk, setting the stage for what would come next. Diego sat in his car, the engine idling as he stared through the rain-speckled windshield at the modest diner. Neon letters flickered above the entrance, casting a faint glow onto the puddled sidewalk. Inside, the faint outline of bustling staff moved through the narrow aisles, balancing trays and exchanging hurried words. His heart quickened when he spotted her, Bailey, balancing a tray of dishes, her movements deliberate and efficient despite the tired slump of her shoulders. He had spent days searching for her, following vague leads and enduring skeptical glances. Now seeing her again brought a wave of relief he hadn't anticipated. But as he watched her navigate the diner, he hesitated. Would she want to see him? Or would she resent his intrusion into her attempt to move forward? Diego exhaled deeply, grabbed his umbrella, and stepped out into the drizzle. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, drawing a few curious glances from patrons. The warm scent of coffee and fried food enveloped him, a stark contrast to the cool rain outside. Bailey didn't notice him at first, her focus locked on clearing a table near the back of the diner. A waitress approached Diego with a welcoming smile. "Table for one?" she asked, her tone polite but brisk. "No, I'm actually here to see someone," Diego replied, his gaze fixed on Bailey. The waitress followed his line of sight, her expression softening. "Ah, Bailey. She's been working hard since she got here. A good kid." Diego nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Can I talk to her?" The waitress hesitated before offering a small smile. "Let me grab her for you." She disappeared toward the back, where Bailey had just set down her tray. Diego watched as the waitress spoke to Bailey, who stiffened at the mention of him. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing in recognition as she caught sight of him. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, with a resigned sigh, she walked toward him, wiping her hands on her apron. "What are you doing here?" Bailey asked, her tone cautious but tinged with irritation. Her gaze flickered to the other diners, then back to Diego, as if weighing her options for escape. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," Diego replied, his voice calm and measured. "You left so abruptly." Bailey crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "I didn't think you'd notice." "Or care," Diego frowned, her words cutting deeper than he expected. "Of course I noticed." "You didn't have to leave like that." Bailey glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with the attention their exchange was beginning to draw. "Can we not do this here?" she said, her voice quieter now. Diego gestured toward an empty booth near the corner. "Fine. Let's sit and talk." Bailey hesitated, then nodded, untying her apron and tossing it onto the counter before following him to the booth. She slid into the seat across from him, her wary expression never faltering. Diego could see the weight of her exhaustion in her eyes, but there was also a flicker of defiance that made her seem unbreakable despite her circumstances. "You didn't have to look for me," Bailey said, breaking the silence as she folded her hands on the table. "I told you, I don't need help." "You might not think you do," Diego replied, leaning forward slightly. "But everyone needs someone at some point, and you shouldn't have to face everything alone." Bailey's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. For a moment, Diego thought she might argue, but instead she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "You don't get it," she said softly. "People like me. We don't get someone. We don't get second chances." Diego leaned back, his arms crossing as he regarded her carefully. "I'm not here to lecture you or pretend I know what it's like to be in your shoes," he said, his voice steady. "But I know what it's like to feel like the world is stacked against you. And I know what it's like to need a lifeline, even if you don't want to admit it." Bailey's eyes flicked up to meet his, suspicion and curiosity warring in her expression. "Why do you care? Why are you even here?" Diego hesitated, the question cutting through the carefully constructed walls he had built around his own vulnerabilities. "Maybe because someone cared enough to help me once," he said finally. "Or maybe because I see someone who deserves a chance, even if she doesn't believe it yet." Bailey's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't look away. "I've been on my own for a long time," she said. "I'm used to it, and I don't need pity." "This isn't pity," Diego replied firmly. "It's an opportunity to get back on your feet, to rebuild. If you'll let me, I can help." Bailey looked at him for a long time, as if searching for a crack in his sincerity. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but edged with resolve. "And what's in it for you?" Diego smiled faintly, though the weight of her question lingered. "Maybe nothing," he admitted. "Or maybe it's knowing I did something that mattered." The air between them hung heavy with unspoken tension. Bailey exhaled deeply and leaned back in the booth. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know if I can trust this, or you." "Then start small," Diego suggested. "Let me buy you a meal. We can figure out the rest later." For the first time, Bailey's lips curved into a hesitant, almost imperceptible smile. "Fine, but only because I'm starving." Diego flagged down the waitress, who approached with a knowing smile. As they placed their orders, Bailey's posture began to relax, the wariness in her eyes softening just slightly. Diego could sense it was only the first step, but it was a step nonetheless. As their food arrived and Bailey began to eat, Diego resisted the urge to push her for more details. He knew trust wasn't something she gave easily. Instead, he watched as she finished her meal with an efficiency born of necessity, her eyes darting occasionally to the windows as if checking for an escape route. When she finally set her fork down, she looked at Diego, her expression unreadable. "I'll think about it," she said. "The whole getting back on my feet thing, but don't expect any miracles." Diego nodded, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. Fair enough. As Bailey tied her apron back on and returned to work, Diego stepped out into the drizzle, his mind already spinning with plans. He knew this was just the beginning, and he was determined to help her see that there was more to life than survival. This time, he wouldn't let her disappear. The connection forged in that diner booth marked the start of something neither of them could fully understand yet, but both would soon realize was life-changing. Diego left with a renewed sense of purpose, while Bailey, watching him leave through the diner's rain-streaked window, felt the faintest glimmer of something she hadn't dared to hope for in years: possibility. Diego sat in his office, leaning back in his sleek leather chair, staring out at the Seattle skyline. The rain had started again, a gentle drizzle coating the windows in a soft grey haze. His thoughts kept circling back to Bailey. He had spent the morning reviewing his schedule, rearranging appointments, and brainstorming a way to introduce her to an opportunity that wouldn't overwhelm her or feel like charity. His desk phone buzzed, and Laura's voice came through the speaker. "Your 2 o'clock has been rescheduled, Mr. Carter. Anything else I can help with?" "No, that's all for now. Thanks, Laura," Diego replied absently. He drummed his fingers on the desk before pulling out his phone and scrolling to Bailey's contact, a number she had reluctantly shared before he'd left the diner. After a moment's hesitation, he tapped out a text. "Hey, Bailey. Let's meet tomorrow. I've got an idea to discuss." My treat again. He hesitated briefly before hitting send. Less than a minute later, his phone buzzed with her reply. "Fine, but no fancy restaurants." Diego smirked, shaking his head. "You got it. Same diner at 1 p.m. The next afternoon, Diego arrived early, choosing the same booth in the corner they had shared before. He ordered coffee and waited, the slight tension in his shoulders betraying the weight of the conversation ahead. He was used to negotiating billion-dollar deals, but somehow this felt more personal and infinitely more delicate. When Bailey walked in, her presence was subtle but confident, her steps purposeful despite the ever-present wariness in her eyes. She wore the same jacket from the night they'd met, though it was slightly less damp today. She slid into the booth across from Diego, crossing her arms and leaning back. "So what's this idea?" she asked without preamble, her tone skeptical. Diego took a sip of his coffee, meeting her gaze. "I want to offer you a job." Bailey blinked, her arms tightening around herself instinctively. "A job?" "Yes," Diego said, his tone steady but inviting. "As my assistant. Nothing you can't handle. Basic tasks, scheduling, helping organize meetings. I'll teach you what you need to know." Bailey stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Why me?" "Because I see potential," Diego replied simply. "You're resourceful, determined, and capable, and you deserve a shot at something better than scraping by." Bailey's jaw tightened, her defenses rising. "I don't have any experience, no address, nothing. You could hire anyone better." Diego leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Everyone starts somewhere, Bailey. And I'm offering you a place to start." Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the table, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Diego said, leaning back. "It's an honest offer. You'll work, you'll get paid, and you'll have the chance to build something for yourself. If it doesn't work out, you can walk away. No strings." Bailey exhaled slowly, her defenses wavering. She hadn't expected this. A real chance, free of pity or condescension, but it still felt too good to be true. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice low but steady. Diego nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Take your time. I'll be here when you're ready." Bailey stood, her movements deliberate as if trying to mask the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "Thanks," she said quietly before heading for the door. Diego watched her go, knowing that this was only the beginning. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, not just for her, but for himself. The next morning, Bailey paced back and forth in the small, cramped room she was renting by the week. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts as she tried to process Diego's offer. It was tempting, more than tempting, but every time she considered accepting, a voice in her head whispered warnings of failure, rejection, and disappointment. She couldn't help but think back to the countless times she'd been let down or told she wasn't good enough. Her eyes landed on her worn sketchbook sitting on the edge of the bed, a tangible reminder of the dreams she'd long buried. She picked it up and flipped through the pages, her fingers brushing over the charcoal sketches of cityscapes and people she'd encountered. Art had always been her escape, her way of making sense of a chaotic world. But even that had started to feel like a far-off fantasy. Still, Diego's words lingered in her mind. Everyone starts somewhere. She didn't trust easily, but there was something about him that felt different. He wasn't offering her charity. At least, it didn't seem like it. He was offering her a real chance. And deep down, as much as it scared her, she wanted to take it. By noon, Bailey found herself walking toward the towering office building Diego had mentioned in his text. Her hands were stuffed deep into her jacket pockets, her nerves a jumbled mess as she approached the glass doors. The receptionist greeted her with a polite but professional smile, directing her to Diego's office on the 15th floor. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. When the doors finally slid open, Bailey stepped into a sleek, modern space filled with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered sweeping views of the city. The hum of activity around her was almost overwhelming. Employees moved purposefully through the hallways, their conversations clipped and efficient. Diego appeared at the end of the corridor, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was dressed sharply, but his expression softened when he saw her. "Bailey," he said, his voice warm as he approached. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I," she admitted, her hands tightening around the strap of her bag. He gestured toward his office. "Come on, let's talk." Inside, Diego's office was just as impressive as the rest of the building, with sleek furniture and a wall of windows that framed the rainy Seattle skyline. Bailey sat across from him at the polished desk, her back straight and her posture guarded. "This doesn't mean I've said yes," she said quickly, her tone firm. "Fair enough," Diego replied, leaning back in his chair. "But you're here, and that's a start." Bailey nodded, her gaze drifting to the windows. "So, what exactly would I be doing?" Diego explained the job in detail, answering emails, managing schedules, and assisting with small projects. He promised to provide training and support, emphasizing that she wouldn't be thrown into the deep end. As he spoke, Bailey found herself relaxing, her initial skepticism giving way to cautious interest. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone saw her as more than just a charity case. "I'll try," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "But if this doesn't work out—" "You'll walk away," Diego finished for her, his smile reassuring. No hard feelings. Bailey hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Okay, I'll give it a shot." Diego extended his hand across the desk, his expression sincere. "Welcome aboard." As their hands shook, Bailey couldn't help but feel a flicker of something unfamiliar. Hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally moving toward it. Bailey's first day at the office was a whirlwind of activity, a blur of unfamiliar faces and hurried conversations that left her feeling both out of place and overwhelmed. She stood near Diego's desk, clutching a notepad he had handed her earlier, her eyes scanning the open-plan workspace. The modern office hummed with productivity, its glass walls and polished floors reflecting the cityscape beyond. Diego, standing beside her, offered a reassuring smile. "Take a breath," he said, his tone calm but encouraging. "You'll get the hang of it." Bailey nodded, though the knot in her stomach didn't loosen. She wasn't used to environments like this, spaces that demanded efficiency and confidence she wasn't sure she possessed. She followed Diego as he led her to her small workstation, tucked into a corner of the bustling office. "This is you," Diego said, gesturing to a desk with a sleek monitor and an ergonomic chair. "I've set up a list of tasks to get you started. Nothing too complicated, mostly organizing schedules and emails." Bailey glanced at the screen, where a detailed to-do list awaited her. She swallowed hard, nodding again. "Got it." Diego studied her for a moment, before lowering his voice. "Remember, if you have questions, just ask. No one expects you to know everything on day one." "Okay," she replied, grateful for his patience. As Diego walked away to handle his own meetings, Bailey took a deep breath and sank into the chair. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain where to begin. She had barely started sorting through Diego's emails when a voice interrupted her focus. "New here, huh?" Bailey looked up to see a tall, sharply dressed man leaning casually against the edge of her desk. His smile was polite, but his eyes held an edge that made her uneasy. "Yeah," she said cautiously. "I just started." "I'm James," he said, extending a hand, "Senior Project Manager. Let me guess, Diego's latest charity case." Bailey stiffened, her hand halting mid-reach. "Excuse me?" James chuckled, a hint of condescension in his tone. "Don't take it the wrong way. Diego's got a soft spot for these kinds of projects. You're not the first." Bailey's jaw tightened, heat rising to her face. Before she could respond, another voice cut in. "James," Laura said sharply as she approached, her no-nonsense demeanor instantly commanding attention. "Don't you have actual work to do?" James raised his hands in mock surrender, his grin never wavering. "Just welcoming the new hire, Laura." "Your welcome is noted," Laura replied, her tone icy. She turned to Bailey, her expression softening. "Don't let him bother you. He's all talk." Bailey managed a small nod, though her hands were still clenched beneath the desk. Laura gave her a reassuring smile before walking away, leaving Bailey to wrestle with her frustration. Turning back to her screen, Bailey tried to refocus, but James's words lingered in her mind. She hated how easily they had gotten under her skin, feeding the doubts she was already trying to suppress. For the rest of the morning, she buried herself in the tasks Diego had assigned, determined to prove, to herself and to anyone doubting her, that she could handle this. After they finalized the details, Diego led Bailey on a quick tour of the office. The bustling energy of the place was overwhelming at first, but Diego's calm demeanor helped ground her. He introduced her to a few key team members, though she noticed the curious glances and quiet murmurs from others as they passed. It didn't take a genius to figure out that she didn't quite fit the polished image of the office. One introduction, however, stood out. James Hudson, a sharp-dressed man with a charismatic smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, extended his hand with calculated precision. "Bailey, right? Welcome aboard," he said smoothly, though there was an edge to his tone that made her stomach twist. "Thanks," Bailey replied, gripping his hand briefly before stepping back. Diego had mentioned James earlier, a high-ranking colleague with a reputation for ambition. His measured demeanor only heightened her sense of unease. As they moved on, Diego leaned in slightly. "Don't worry about James. He likes to test people. Just focus on your work, and you'll be fine." Bailey nodded, though her wariness lingered. She wasn't sure if it was James or the entire environment, but the pressure of being here felt heavy. Diego seemed to notice and kept the tour brief, ending at a smaller workspace near his office. "This will be your desk," he said, gesturing to the clean, minimalist setup. "You'll have everything you need here: laptop, supplies, and access to all the tools. Take the rest of the day to get comfortable, and tomorrow we'll start small." Bailey ran her fingers over the edge of the desk, her mind racing with doubts. Could she really handle this? What if she messed up? But Diego's steady presence next to her was oddly reassuring. "Thanks," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. Diego gave her a small smile. "You've got this, Bailey. Just take it one step at a time." As Diego left her to settle in, Bailey sat down and took a deep breath. The desk felt both foreign and oddly comforting, like a tiny island in a sea of uncertainty. She opened the laptop, the bright screen reflecting her apprehension. She didn't have the faintest idea how she was going to navigate this new world. But she was here. That had to count for something. Across the office, James watched her from the corner of his eye, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Interesting choice, Carter," he muttered under his breath, already calculating how this unexpected addition could be turned to his advantage. Meanwhile, Diego returned to his office, his mind restless. Offering Bailey the job had felt like the right thing to do, but he couldn't shake the nagging thought of what would happen if she struggled, or if others in the office didn't accept her. Still, as he glanced at the rain-streaked skyline, he felt a flicker of determination. Everyone deserved a chance, and he was committed to seeing Bailey succeed. For Bailey, the day ended with mixed emotions. The doubts and fears still lingered, but there was also a faint glimmer of pride. She'd shown up. She'd taken the first step. And as she left the building that evening, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, she allowed herself to think, maybe this could work. But neither Bailey nor Diego could have anticipated the challenges ahead, as the lines between opportunity, ambition, and trust began to blur. The path forward would test them both in ways they had yet to imagine. Diego walked into the office early that morning, a cup of coffee in hand, ready to start the day. The building was quieter than usual, the hum of activity still subdued as the team trickled in. As he passed by Bailey's desk, he noticed her hunched over, her attention fixed on something. She didn't see him approach until he cleared his throat softly. Bailey startled, quickly closing the sketchbook she had open in front of her. "Oh, hey," she said, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "Morning," Diego replied, tilting his head slightly. "What's that you were working on?" "Nothing," she said a little too quickly, sliding the sketchbook into her bag. Her fingers lingered on the strap, a telltale sign of her hesitation. Diego raised an eyebrow, but he didn't press. Instead, he set his coffee down on the edge of her desk. "I was just about to grab another cup. Want one?" Bailey blinked, momentarily thrown off guard by the casual question. Sure," she said, nodding. "Black, right?" Diego asked, already turning toward the break room. "Yeah, thanks," she replied, her voice softening as he walked away. She watched him go, her heart still racing slightly from the close call with her sketchbook. Drawing was something she rarely shared with anyone. It was personal, private, and hers alone. The thought of Diego seeing her work made her stomach twist, though she couldn't quite explain why. By the time Diego returned with 2 steaming cups of coffee, Bailey had composed herself. She thanked him as he handed her the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. He gave her a quick smile before heading back to his office, leaving her to her thoughts. The morning passed quickly as Bailey tackled the small tasks Diego had assigned her. Though she still felt out of place in the bustling office, the routine was beginning to feel manageable. She caught herself glancing at her bag a few times, where her sketchbook lay hidden. The urge to draw during her breaks was strong, but the fear of being judged kept her from pulling it out again. It wasn't until late afternoon, after most of the office had cleared out, that Diego found himself passing Bailey's desk once more. She was gone, likely in the break room or running an errand. Curious, his eyes drifted to her desk. His gaze landed on her bag, the edge of her sketchbook peeking out just slightly. A wave of hesitation washed over him before curiosity got the better of him. Diego carefully lifted the sketchbook and opened it to the first page. His breath caught as he took in the intricate lines and shading of the drawing before him. It was a cityscape, familiar yet otherworldly in its detail. Each line seemed alive, pulsing with emotion and depth. As he flipped through the pages, he saw portraits, landscapes, and abstract pieces, each one more stunning than the last. When he heard the faint click of heels approaching, Diego quickly closed the sketchbook and returned it to its spot. Bailey appeared a moment later, her expression cautious as she caught sight of him standing nearby. "What's up?" she asked, her voice guarded. Diego hesitated, then smiled. "Nothing. Just finishing up for the day. You?" Bailey shrugged, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if sensing something had shifted. "Same." Diego nodded, but his mind was racing. He had seen talent like hers before, but not often, and never with this kind of raw, unpolished brilliance. The question wasn't whether she had potential, it was how to help her realize it. Diego leaned casually against the edge of Bailey's desk, carefully choosing his next words. "You know," he began, his tone light, "we have a few art consultants who come in to work on branding projects. They're always looking for fresh perspectives. Ever considered working on something like that?" Bailey's eyes narrowed, her defenses snapping into place. "What are you talking about?" she asked cautiously. "Your drawings," Diego said, his voice steady but encouraging. "You're talented, Bailey. Really talented. I think you could do something with it." Her posture stiffened, and she looked away. "You haven't seen my drawings." Diego hesitated for a moment before admitting, "I might have caught a glimpse earlier." "They're incredible." Bailey's face flushed and her hands balled into fists. "You went through my stuff?" "No," Diego replied quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "It was sitting on your desk, open. I didn't dig through anything. I just happened to see it." She glared at him, her anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "You don't get it, do you? Drawing is just something I do. It's not some big deal." Diego crossed his arms, his expression calm but resolute. "It is a big deal. You have something special, Bailey, and I'm not saying that to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. I'm saying it because I believe it." Bailey shook her head, her voice rising slightly. "People don't just make it because they're good at something. The world doesn't work like that." Diego frowned, her words striking a chord. "Maybe it doesn't, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Look, I know what it's like to feel like the odds are stacked against you, but I also know that sometimes taking a chance is all you've got." Bailey stared at him, her anger softening into something more vulnerable. She wanted to argue, to push him away, but a part of her couldn't ignore the sincerity in his voice. "What if I fail?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Diego leaned in slightly, his tone softening. "Then you get back up and try again. Failure isn't the end. It's just a step forward." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Bailey's gaze dropped to her hands, her mind spinning with doubts and possibilities. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I'll think about it," she muttered, her voice laced with uncertainty. "That's all I'm asking," Diego replied with a faint smile. "No pressure. Just think about it." Bailey nodded slowly, though her expression remained guarded. As Diego stepped away and headed back to his office, She stared at her bag, her fingers itching to pull out her sketchbook. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if her art could be more than just an escape, if it could be a way forward. Back in his office, Diego sat down at his desk, his thoughts racing. Bailey's reaction had been a reminder of how fragile trust could be, but he wasn't deterred. He could see the spark in her, the potential waiting to be unlocked, and he was determined to help her see it too, no matter how long it took. As the day drew to a close, Bailey gathered her things and left the office, her emotions a tangled mix of anger, fear, and a glimmer of something else she couldn't quite name. Walking through the rain-soaked streets, she clutched her sketchbook tightly, as if it were a lifeline. Diego's words echoed in her mind, challenging her to believe in something she had long since dismissed, herself. Though she didn't realize it yet, the decision she was wrestling with would mark the beginning of a journey that would change everything, not just for her, but for Diego as well. The community center buzzed with activity as Diego and Bailey arrived, the air filled with the hum of conversation and the faint sound of classical music playing in the background. The event had been organized to showcase local talent, and the walls of the main hall were lined with paintings, photographs, and sculptures created by artists from all walks of life. Bailey's pieces, carefully arranged on one of the prominent walls, stood out with their raw emotion and intricate details. Bailey tugged at the hem of her sweater nervously, her eyes darting around the room. "I don't know if I should be here," she whispered to Diego, who was standing beside her with a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You belong here," Diego replied firmly. "Just take a look at your work. It speaks for itself." Bailey glanced at her display. The sketches she had agonized over for weeks now seemed almost foreign under the bright lights of the gallery. She had never imagined her art would be viewed by anyone other than herself, and the vulnerability of it all made her stomach churn. Before she could respond, a voice interrupted their conversation. "Diego Carter," came the smooth, familiar tone of James Hudson. He approached with his usual air of confidence, his eyes flicking to Bailey's art before settling on her. "And this must be the rising star I've heard so much about." Bailey stiffened under his gaze, and Diego stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between her and James. "James," Diego greeted, his tone polite but clipped. "What brings you here?" "Supporting local talent, of course," James said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And I must say, Bailey's work is intriguing." Bailey's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She didn't like the way James's words felt loaded, as though he was looking for a crack in her armor. "Her work is exceptional," Diego corrected, his voice steady. "And it speaks for itself." James's gaze lingered on Bailey for a moment longer before he turned back to Diego. "Of course, you've always had an eye for talent," he said smoothly. "Enjoy the evening." As James walked away, Bailey exhaled sharply, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "What was that about?" she muttered. "Nothing to worry about," Diego assured her, though his jaw tightened. "He likes to play games, but he won't touch your success." Bailey nodded, though unease lingered in her chest. The evening continued, and as more guests wandered over to view her work, the tight knot of anxiety began to loosen. A few people approached her, offering compliments and asking about her creative process. Slowly but surely, she started to feel like she belonged in the room. Just as she was beginning to relax, the evening took an unexpected turn. James reappeared, this time with a small group of people in tow. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began loudly, drawing the attention of the nearby crowd, "let me introduce you to Bailey Brooks, a truly unique talent with an inspiring backstory." Bailey froze as James's words echoed in her ears. She could see the knowing glint in his eyes, the faint smirk playing on his lips. Whatever he was about to say next, she knew it wouldn't be good. Diego returned to his office, his thoughts still focused on Bailey's artwork. He sat at his desk, staring out at the rain-drenched skyline as possibilities swirled in his mind. The sketches he'd seen weren't just good, they were extraordinary. They told a story, one of resilience and pain, but also of hope and quiet strength. For the first time since offering her the assistant job, Diego felt like he truly understood Bailey. The question now was how to encourage her without overstepping. She was guarded, that much was clear, and the wrong move could push her further away. Still, Diego wasn't one to let potential go unnoticed. He tapped his fingers on the desk, formulating a plan. The next day, as Bailey settled into her usual tasks, Diego approached her desk. She glanced up, a flicker of curiosity crossing her face. "Do you have plans after work today?" Diego asked, his tone casual. Bailey blinked, caught off guard by the question. No, not really. Why?" "There's a community art event happening downtown tonight," he said, sliding a flyer onto her desk. "I thought you might want to check it out. No pressure." Her eyes darted to the flyer, then back to Diego, suspicion creeping into her expression. "Why would you think I'd be interested?" Diego smiled faintly, his gaze steady. "Let's just say I have a hunch. Consider it a chance to get out, see something different." Bailey stared at the flyer for a long moment, her fingers brushing its edge. Finally, she shrugged, her tone nonchalant. "I'll think about it." Diego nodded, satisfied with her response. "Let me know if you change your mind." That evening, Diego arrived at the event early, weaving through the small crowd that had gathered in the intimate gallery space. The walls were lined with vibrant paintings, charcoal sketches, and mixed media pieces, each one telling its own story. He scanned the room, his anticipation growing with each passing minute. When Bailey finally walked in, Diego felt a wave of relief. She looked hesitant, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route, but she was here. "You made it," he said, approaching her with a warm smile. Bailey shoved her hands into her jacket pockets, her posture defensive. "Yeah, well, I didn't have anything better to do." Diego chuckled, not fooled by her attempt at indifference. "Come on, let me show you around." As they wandered through the gallery, Bailey's initial hesitation began to fade. She paused in front of a large, abstract painting, her head tilting slightly as she studied the bold strokes of color. "What do you think?" Diego asked, standing beside her. Bailey hesitated, her gaze never leaving the canvas. "It's powerful," she said finally. "You can feel the emotion behind it." Diego nodded, watching her closely. Art has a way of doing that. It speaks in ways words can't. Bailey glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Why'd you really bring me here?" Diego considered his words carefully. "Because I think you have something to say too, and I want to help you find a way to say it." Bailey's eyes widened slightly, her defenses faltering for just a moment. She opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of applause interrupted her. A guest speaker had taken the stage to thank the artists and the audience for their support. As the crowd turned their attention to the stage, Bailey's gaze drifted back to Diego. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was right. There was something inside her worth sharing. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, but as they left the gallery, Diego handed her a small card. "This is the contact info for the event organizer," he said. "If you ever feel ready, they're always looking for new artists." Bailey took the card hesitantly, her fingers brushing its edge. "Thanks," she said softly. Diego smiled, sensing he'd planted a seed. "No pressure. Just keep it in mind." As they parted ways, Bailey walked home with the card clutched tightly in her hand, her mind racing with possibilities. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to hope for. inspiration. Bailey stood in front of the large windows of her apartment, staring at the business card Diego had given her weeks ago. The simple white card bore the name and contact information of the gallery organizer. She had looked at it every day since the night at the art event, but something had always held her back from dialing the number. The idea of putting her work out into the world was thrilling, but the fear of rejection loomed even larger. The buzz of her phone snapped her out of her thoughts. It was Anna, the waitress from the diner. Bailey answered, grateful for the distraction. "Hey, Bailey," Anna said, her voice tinged with worry. "I hate to ask, but I'm in a bind. The sitter cancelled and I've got a double shift today. Could you watch Mia for a few hours?" Bailey hesitated. Babysitting wasn't exactly in her comfort zone, but Anna had been one of the few people who had shown her kindness when she needed it most. "Sure," she said finally. "Bring her over." An hour later, Bailey was sitting cross-legged on the floor of her small living room, watching Anna's 4-year-old daughter color in a notebook. Mia's laughter filled the room as she held up her drawing, a crayon portrait of Bailey with wild, colorful hair. For the first time in weeks, Bailey felt the tight knot of tension in her chest begin to loosen. "You're really good at this," Bailey said, smiling at Mia. "Maybe you'll be an artist someday." Mia giggled, her bright eyes sparkling. "Like you?" Bailey's smile faltered. "I'm not an artist." Mia tilted her head, clearly confused. "But you draw all the time?" Bailey looked away, her gaze landing on her closed sketchbook, sitting on the coffee table. She didn't respond, but Mia's innocent observation lingered in her mind long after Anna returned to pick her up. That evening, Bailey found herself opening her sketchbook, flipping through its pages with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her fingers brushed over the edges of the drawings she'd poured herself into. Portraits of strangers, moody cityscapes, raw expressions of her inner turmoil. These were parts of herself she had always kept hidden. But something about Mia's simple question had struck a chord. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. The voice on the other end was warm and welcoming, and before she knew it, Bailey had scheduled a meeting to discuss submitting her work for the gallery's next showcase. When she hung up, Bailey felt a rush of adrenaline and fear. She glanced at the clock and realized it was almost midnight. She had spent hours preparing her sketches, selecting the pieces that felt the most personal and authentic. As she set them aside and crawled into bed, her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. For the first time in a long while, she felt as though she was finally moving toward something meaningful. Bailey sat on the edge of her bed that night, the card Diego had given her resting in her palm. Her thumb traced over the embossed lettering as her mind churned with conflicting thoughts. The gallery event had stirred something in her, a reminder of the joy and freedom she once found in art. But along with it came a surge of doubt. What if she wasn't good enough? What if no one cared about her work? The fear of rejection loomed over her like a shadow, threatening to crush the fragile spark of hope that had ignited during the event. She flipped open her sketchbook, its familiar pages offering a strange combination of comfort and vulnerability. The drawings were pieces of her, each line and stroke a reflection of the life she'd endured. But now, for the first time, she wondered if those pieces might be worth sharing. The next morning, Bailey arrived at the office with a mixture of apprehension and determination. Diego greeted her with his usual calm energy, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes as he noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor. "How are you feeling after last night?" he asked casually as they crossed paths near the break room. Bailey shrugged, playing it cool. "It was different. Not bad, though." Diego smirked, sensing the understatement. "Glad you came. Sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone can lead to unexpected opportunities." She nodded, biting back a retort. She wasn't ready to admit just how much the evening had affected her. Not yet. As the day progressed, Bailey found herself watching Diego more closely. He moved through the office with an effortless confidence, his interactions with staff marked by a quiet authority that commanded respect. Yet there was a warmth to him too, a genuine care for the people around him that set him apart from others she'd encountered in her life. By lunchtime, Bailey made up her mind. She approached Diego's office, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. Knocking lightly on the open door, she stepped inside. "Got a minute?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Diego looked up from his laptop, his eyebrows lifting in surprise. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Bailey hesitated, clutching the sketchbook tighter. "You said something last night. About having something to say. I've been thinking about that." Diego leaned back in his chair, giving her his full attention. "And?" Without another word, Bailey placed the sketchbook on his desk and opened it to a random page. It was a drawing of a city skyline at dusk, the buildings bathed in soft, fading light. Diego studied it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "This is incredible," he said finally, his voice filled with quiet awe. Bailey shifted uncomfortably. "It's just a hobby. Nothing serious." "Don't do that," Diego said, his tone firm but not unkind. "Don't downplay your talent. This isn't just good, Bailey. It's exceptional." She looked away, unsure how to respond. The vulnerability of sharing her work felt almost unbearable, but Diego's genuine praise made it slightly easier to bear. "I don't know if I can do anything with it," she admitted. "It's just personal." Diego nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's what makes it powerful. Art that comes from a place of truth resonates with people. You've got something special here, Bailey, and I think the world deserves to see it." For the first time, Bailey allowed herself to consider the possibility. Maybe Diego was right. Maybe her art could be more than just an outlet. Maybe it could be a way forward. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "I'll try." Diego smiled, his confidence in her unwavering. "That's all I ask, one step at a time." As Bailey left his office, a small but growing part of her felt ready to take that first step. Little did she know, this decision would change everything. Bailey stood in front of the apartment building she had grown up in, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out the distant sounds of traffic. The peeling paint and cracked windows were just as she remembered, and the air around her seemed to hum with memories she had tried so hard to bury. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to take a deep breath. "You've got this," she muttered under her breath, though her voice wavered. She didn't believe it, but she was here anyway. Diego's encouragement echoed in her mind. Sometimes facing the past is the only way to move forward. It had taken weeks of convincing herself to come back, but the message from her stepfather had made it impossible to avoid. She couldn't keep running. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the buzzer for his apartment. A long, grating silence followed before the speaker crackled to life. "Yeah?" "It's Bailey," she said, her voice steady despite the knots in her stomach. The door buzzed, unlocking with a metallic click. She hesitated, then pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The familiar scent of mildew and old carpet hit her like a wave, and she had to fight the urge to turn around and leave. The climb up the narrow staircase felt like it lasted forever. By the time she reached the third floor, her palms were damp with sweat. She stood in front of the door marked 3B for what felt like an eternity before finally raising her hand to knock. The door opened before her knuckles met the wood, revealing a man with greying hair and a hard expression. Her stepfather. He looked her up and down, his lips curling into a sneer. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. Thought you were too good for us now. Bailey's jaw tightened, but she refused to look away. I came because I needed to. I'm not here for you. Then why are you here? He shot back, stepping aside to let her in. She walked past him into the small apartment, the air thick with cigarette smoke. The furniture was the same, threadbare and stained, a stark reminder of the years she had spent trying to escape. Bailey turned to face him, her voice calm but firm. I came to say this to your face. You don't get to have power over me anymore. I'm not afraid of you, and I'm done letting you define who I am. Her stepfather raised an eyebrow, a mocking laugh escaping his lips. You think you're some big shot now? That you can just waltz in here and act like you're better than me? Bailey's hands clenched into fists, but she kept her tone steady. Number, I'm not better than you, but I am better than what you tried to make me believe about myself, and I came here to tell you that I don't need your approval or your permission to move forward. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Bailey stood her ground, her pulse racing, but her resolve unshaken. For the first time in years, she felt a sliver of freedom crack through the walls she had built around her past. Her stepfather scoffed, the mocking smirk still lingering on his face, but there was something else in his expression, a flicker of unease, as if her words had struck a chord he didn't want to acknowledge. He waved a hand dismissively and turned away, pacing toward the small kitchen where an empty beer can rested on the counter. You've always had a mouth on you, he muttered, grabbing the can and crushing it in his hand. But talk doesn't mean anything, Bailey. The world doesn't care about your sob stories. Bailey took a steadying breath, refusing to let his words cut her. You're right. The world doesn't care. But I do. And I'm finally learning that what I think about myself matters more than what you think. Her stepfather laughed again, this time louder, but it was hollow, more an attempt to mask his discomfort than genuine humor. He turned back to face her, his eyes narrowing. You think you're tough now? You think you can just forget where you came from? I'll never forget, Bailey said firmly, but remembering doesn't mean letting it control me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the room was almost suffocating, but Bailey stood her ground. Her stepfather's gaze faltered, his confidence cracking just slightly under the weight of her resolve. Finally, he shook his head, his voice quieter, but still laced with bitterness. You're still that scared little girl to me. You always will be. Bailey felt a pang in her chest at his words, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and met his gaze with unwavering determination. Then that's on you, not me, she said. I came here to make peace with my past, not to convince you of anything. So believe whatever you want. It doesn't change who I am. She turned toward the door, her steps steady despite the storm raging inside her. Just as she reached for the handle, she heard his voice again, quieter this time. You're just like your mother, he said, almost to himself, always thinking you're better than the rest of us. Bailey froze for a moment, her hand on the doorknob. Then, without looking back, she replied, Maybe I am. And maybe that's why I'll make it. With that, she stepped out of the apartment, letting the door close firmly behind her. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for years felt lighter somehow, as if she had finally let go of something she didn't even realize she was carrying. As she descended the stairs and stepped out into the cool evening air, Bailey felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. The scars of her past hadn't disappeared, but they no longer felt like chains holding her back. She had faced the man who had haunted her memories for so long, and she had walked away stronger. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Diego. How did it go? She stared at the screen for a moment before typing back, "I'm okay. Thanks for pushing me to do this." His reply came almost instantly. "Proud of you. See you tomorrow?" A small smile tugged at her lips. "Yeah, see you tomorrow." As she made her way back to her apartment, Bailey felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of possibility. The past no longer held her captive, and for the first time, the future felt like hers to shape. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready for them, and this time, she wouldn't face them alone. Bailey adjusted her blazer nervously as she stepped into the brightly lit gallery, the hum of voices and the clinking of glasses immediately filling her ears. She had spent days preparing for this moment, but now that she was here, the weight of it pressed heavily on her chest. The walls were adorned with her sketches and paintings, each piece meticulously displayed under soft spotlights. Seeing her work presented like this felt surreal, almost as if it belonged to someone else. Diego was already there, standing by the entrance, chatting casually with a group of guests. His sharp suit and confident demeanor made him stand out, but when he caught sight of Bailey, his expression softened. He excused himself and crossed the room to meet her. "You made it," he said warmly, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of hesitation. "I wasn't sure I would," Bailey admitted, glancing around at the growing crowd. This is a lot." Diego placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You earned this. Every piece here tells your story. Let them see it." Bailey nodded, though her stomach churned with doubt. She took a deep breath and stepped further into the room, her eyes darting from one guest to another. People stood in clusters, admiring her art, murmuring in quiet awe. It was a strange, almost disorienting experience to hear strangers discussing her work, piecing together fragments of her life from the strokes on a canvas. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted her thoughts. A middle-aged woman with glasses and a kind smile approached. "Are you the artist?" Bailey hesitated before nodding. "Yes, I am." The woman's face lit up. "Your work is extraordinary. The emotion, the depth, it's unlike anything I've seen before. Where do you draw your inspiration from?" Bailey blinked, caught off guard by the question. "It's personal," she said carefully. "But I guess you could say it comes from life, both the struggles and the moments of hope." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "It shows. Thank you for sharing your talent with us." As the woman walked away, Bailey felt a strange mix of pride and vulnerability. She wasn't used to this, being seen, being recognized. But as the evening wore on, she began to relax, the nerves gradually giving way to a quiet sense of accomplishment. From across the room, Diego watched her interact with the guests, his lips curving into a smile. He had always believed in her potential, but seeing her shine like this was something else entirely. Bailey caught his eye and gave him a small, genuine smile in return. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged, not just in this room, but in her own skin. But beneath the surface, an old fear lingered, whispering that this newfound success might be fleeting. As the night progressed, Bailey found herself drawn to a quieter corner of the gallery, away from the buzz of conversations. She needed a moment to breathe, to process everything that was happening. She gazed at one of her larger pieces, a charcoal sketch of a young girl sitting alone on a park bench, the shadows around her almost swallowing her whole. It was one of the first sketches she'd ever done after leaving home, and now it was here, framed and illuminated for the world to see. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said from behind her. She turned to see James Hudson, a glass of wine in his hand, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I was just telling a guest how raw and evocative your work is." Bailey tensed instinctively. She had seen James around the office enough to know his reputation. Charming but calculating, always looking for an angle. "Thanks," she said curtly, her gaze returning to the sketch. James took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You've come a long way, Bailey. From what I hear, Diego's done quite a bit to get you here." Bailey turned to face him, her jaw tightening. "Diego gave me a chance. The rest, I earned." "Of course," James replied smoothly, raising his glass in a mock toast. "But let's not pretend opportunities like this come to just anyone. Diego clearly sees something in you, something worth investing in." Bailey's stomach churned at the insinuation in his tone. "I don't owe him, or anyone, anything more than my work, if that's what you're getting at." James chuckled softly, taking a sip of his wine. "Relax. I'm just making conversation. Enjoy the night, Bailey. Success suits you." With that, he walked away, leaving her standing there, her emotions a tangled mess of pride and frustration. She exhaled deeply, forcing herself to shake off his words. This night wasn't about James or his thinly veiled digs. It was about her journey, her resilience. She turned back to the sketch, focusing on the details she had poured into it, and let the noise around her fade into the background. "Hey!" Diego's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see him approaching, his expression a mix of concern and encouragement. "You okay?" Bailey nodded, though her voice wavered slightly when she replied, "Yeah, just needed a minute." Diego glanced at the sketch she'd been staring at, his brow furrowing slightly. "This one. It's powerful. The loneliness, the vulnerability. But there's strength in it too." Bailey looked at him, surprised by his insight. "That's exactly what I wanted people to feel when they saw it." "And they do," Diego said firmly. "I do. Never doubt that, Bailey." The warmth in his voice steadied her, and for the first time that evening she felt grounded. As they stood there in silence side by side, Bailey realized something profound. This wasn't just a milestone in her career. It was a reclamation of herself, a declaration that she was no longer defined by the shadows of her past. By the time the gallery began to empty, Bailey felt a calm sense of pride settle over her. She hadn't just survived the night, she had owned it. As she gathered her things, Diego walked over, his expression unreadable, but his eyes warm. "Ready to head out?" he asked. Bailey nodded, glancing one last time at her sketch on the wall. "Yeah, I think I am." As they stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, Bailey felt lighter, freer. For the first time in years, she believed that the future wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. And she was ready for it. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the Seattle skyline, its rays breaking through scattered clouds and painting the city in warm hues. Bailey stood on the balcony of Diego's penthouse, her arms resting on the sleek railing as she gazed out at the view. The faint hum of traffic below and the distant sound of waves lapping against the pier provided a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. She had spent the morning packing up her small apartment, boxing away the few belongings she had accumulated over the years. Each item felt like a fragment of her journey, a thread in the tapestry of the life she had pieced together. The gallery's success had brought with it a flood of opportunities. Invitations to showcase her work in new cities, commissions from collectors, and even the chance to collaborate with other artists. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. Diego stepped out onto the balcony, his footsteps soft against the tile. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with something she couldn't quite place. Bailey glanced at him and offered a faint smile. "Almost done. Just a few more boxes." He nodded, leaning against the railing beside her. "You've got a big road ahead." "Yeah," Bailey said, exhaling slowly. "It's a lot to process. Leaving Seattle, Starting fresh in a new place? Feels like I'm about to step off a cliff. Diego turned to face her, his expression calm but resolute. You're not stepping off a cliff. You're building a bridge to something better. Bailey laughed softly, shaking her head. That sounds like something you'd say. Well, it's true, Diego replied, a small smile playing on his lips. You've come this far because you believed in yourself, even when it was hard. And now you're proving to everyone, including yourself, what you're capable of. Bailey didn't respond immediately. Instead, she let his words sink in, their weight settling over her like a warm blanket. She had spent so long running from her past, from her pain, that she hadn't realized how far she had come until now. For the first time, she could see her path clearly, and it was hers alone to navigate. I couldn't have done it without you, she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. You saw something in me when no one else did. Diego shook his head, his gaze unwavering. I didn't do anything you couldn't have done on your own. I just gave you a nudge. Bailey smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that softened her features. Well, that nudge changed everything. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the wind carrying the faint scent of salt water from the bay. Diego eventually broke the quiet, his voice thoughtful. What's next for you? Bailey turned back to the view, her mind spinning with possibilities. I don't know exactly, but I think that's okay. For the first time, I'm excited to find out. Diego nodded, his own smile faint but proud. Wherever you go, you'll make it yours. That much I know. Bailey felt the truth in his words. She wasn't leaving to escape. She was leaving to grow, to explore what else the world had to offer. And though the thought of parting ways with Diego stirred a bittersweet ache in her chest, she knew it wasn't a goodbye. Not really. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and the connection they'd built would remain, no matter where life took them. As the sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink, Bailey and Diego retreated inside. The warmth of the penthouse enveloped them, the faint hum of music playing from a speaker in the corner. Boxes were stacked neatly by the door, each labeled with a destination that hinted at Bailey's new chapter. Diego walked over to the counter and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water, handing one to Bailey. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. Bailey clinked her glass against his, her smile tinged with gratitude. To the people who make them possible. They drank in silence, the weight of the moment settling between them. It wasn't the kind of silence that needed filling. It was the kind that spoke volumes without words. Bailey set her glass down and took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about this, she began, her voice steady despite the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. Everything that's happened, this opportunity, the gallery, meeting you, it's all been so much more than I ever imagined, and I don't think I ever said it properly. Thank you, Diego. Diego leaned against the counter, his expression soft but thoughtful. You don't owe me thanks, Bailey. You've earned every bit of this. All I did was remind you of what was already there. Bailey shook her head, a small laugh escaping her lips. You keep saying that, but I don't think you realize how much it mattered. Before you, I didn't think I had anything to offer. You didn't just remind me. I think you helped me see it for the first time. Diego didn't reply immediately, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. Then I guess we've both learned something, he said finally. Because helping you reminded me that second chances aren't just about the person getting them. Sometimes they're about the person giving them too. Bailey studied him for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew Diego had his own struggles, his own wounds that hadn't yet fully healed. In helping her, He had found a way to mend parts of himself too. The realization made her chest tighten, not with sadness, but with an overwhelming sense of connection. "So, what about you?" Bailey asked, breaking the momentary silence. "What's next for Diego Carter?" Diego chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing. I guess I keep building. The company, the projects, but maybe with a little more focus on what really matters." Bailey tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "And what really matters?" Diego hesitated, then smiled. "Making a difference. Like I said, it's not just about second chances. It's about doing something meaningful with them." Bailey nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "Then I guess we both have a lot of work to do." They shared a quiet laugh, the atmosphere shifting from somber to light-hearted. For a moment, it felt like no time had passed since their first meeting, two strangers brought together by chance, now standing as friends, allies, and something neither could fully define. The sound of a car horn from the street below broke the moment. Bailey glanced at the clock, her heart quickening as reality sank in. "That's my ride." Diego nodded, walking her to the door where the boxes waited. They carried them down together, loading them into the waiting car. As the driver secured the last of them, Bailey turned to Diego, her expression a mix of excitement and hesitation. "This isn't goodbye," she said, her voice firm. "Not even close," Diego replied, a faint smile on his lips. Bailey stepped closer, her arms wrapping around him in a brief but heartfelt hug. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. "Go show the world what you can do, Bailey," Diego said as they pulled apart. She climbed into the car, her sketchbook clutched tightly in her lap. As the vehicle pulled away, she looked back, catching one last glimpse of Diego standing on the curb, his hands in his pockets, watching her go. Bailey turned her gaze forward, the city stretching out before her, filled with possibilities she had once thought impossible. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she welcomed the uncertainty with open arms. And as Diego turned and walked back inside, the faintest smile lingered on his face. The chapter with Bailey had come to an end, but he knew the story they had started together would echo far beyond the city limits. For her, for him, for the future.